What's up, guys? We are live with Chuck and Chris doing another Underdog Fantasy Occupy Fantasy Best Ball stream. Chris, how we doing? We got training camp open. We got a couple things to talk about, I guess, but
Yes, Chuck, training camp is open. We've got some real news from NFL teams. I've got my new glasses on because training camps have started. I can see more clearly now that we've got NFL news going. Now, we are going to draft another Best Ball Mania 4 team tonight here on the channel. I've got my exposures up on the screen. I'm up to 43 entries. This will be my 44th entry of Best Ball Mania 4 this evening. And Chuck, I did just want to talk a little bit through my mindset with exposure going forward. I'm pretty happy with how this table looks at the top end here. Outside of a handful of players, I think 25% is about the most I think I will have of anybody by the
mm-hmm.
time I get to like 100 plus entries or so. At this point, I am trying to make a more concerted effort to have more of the elite quarterbacks who I don't really have a ton of. Looking at my quarterback exposure, I've got Josh Allen up here near the top, Jalen Hurts. But I feel like I need to do more work to have more exposure to some of those better stacks this season. And then at the running back position, I like what I have. And in general, I like going much more wide receiver heavy, but I feel like I want to at least be in line with the field on these guys like McCaffrey and Eckler and Bijan Robinson, Nick Chubb, Jonathan Taylor, et cetera, et cetera. You see, none of those guys are at the top of my exposure table here. So I have some work to do there as well. So as I sit down to draft and as we talk through things over the next, not just tonight, next few weeks into September, that's kind of where my mindset is going to be. Obviously, we don't have your stuff on the screen here, but have you thought about any of that at all for some of the drafts you're doing? And are there certain strategies you're trying to employ a little bit more heavily down the stretch here in the final month?
Yeah, a couple streams ago we were talking about I think we were trying to get a little bit more elite tight end, and I'm still mixing it in. But one thing I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to get my elite running back percentages up. Like there were a few guys I was fading really hard. Jonathan Taylor, Travis Etienne, a couple other guys in that range. And now I'm trying to draft a few more teams where I'm getting running backs early, a couple really strong running backs. If I can get like 4 before pick 120, I've been trying that, but it's really hard on Underdog because the wide receivers they go so much earlier than they do on the other sites, despite it being half PPR. And so, like in terms of the guys I already have a bunch of, I'm pretty happy with most of it. Juju's still my highest owned guy at 26%. It's like I'm taking him here and there when he falls to like 130, but I'm trying to avoid him if I can, basically. Just
Good
scooping
news
up.
for Good
Go
news
ahead.
for both you and I is Juju looking good in Patriots camp, finally
Yeah.
returned. With the exposures we have there, we definitely want to see those headlines. So go ahead though.
Oh, just trying to mix up the combos really. So with Spike Week, I can see what percentage I have of guys with my first, second, and third round picks, and beyond that, it's not that big of a deal. But if like all my Cooper Cup is with Saquon or Darren Waller, or all my Jamar Chase has, whatever. I'm trying to just mix up the combos a little bit. Like I still want to really focus on my guys, but I want more combos of maybe team guys that other people aren't getting, especially in the first 3 rounds. Because if I get to the finals with that team, then I have hopefully not the same first 3 picks as 10 other teams in there.
So I did enter a contest while we were talking here. I've got the 8th overall pick tonight, Chuck, and obviously had a little bit of a bummed out reaction there. But if we are emphasizing getting more exposure to elite running backs, I'm in the right range for Eckler, Bijan. Even although the ADP is not quite there yet, I've seen Nick Chubb start to go in the first round. So this is definitely the right range to consider going with one of these guys here. I still think the correct choice, as you're rightly pointing out, we want to be more unique with our first 3 picks because those are the players that are most likely to contribute to our lineup throughout the season. I still think I really only want to go with one of these guys in my first 3 rounds, maybe even 4 or 5 rounds, Chuck. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't hate it. I've been trying some stuff where I'm drafting, like I was already drafting a bunch of 2 running back builds. If I had a top 4 pick with, get one of those top 4 receivers, I don't mind taking 2 running backs back to back at the 2-3 turn. But I don't know. The wide receivers dry up so quickly on Underdog. It gets really difficult when your 4th or 5th receivers like Tyler Boyd at pick 100. And so it's just something to just find the right balance. Like with Austin Eckler and Bijan specifically, I'm trying to get to more Bijan. I might have a blind spot for Eckler. I have 0.5% on Underdog. I've drafted him once in a $4. But I know that that's one guy who, like, he was the RB1 last year, right? Like, why am I so scared to draft him?
And as I sit here with AJ Brown and CD Lamb staring at me, Chuck, this is difficult for me to do. I have the same blind spot you do for Austin Eckler, but you know what? Let's do it tonight. We're going to go with Austin Eckler in the first round.
I like
And
it.
really, it's just I need to make sure that I have at least a little bit of exposure to all these elite players. We know that if they stay healthy and they're on the field, that the touches are going to be there. I do not have any agenda against the running back or Austin Eckler. It's just I do prefer taking one of these elite wide receivers here or Bajan over Eckler straight up right now. So I do have quite a bit more Bajan than Eckler thus far. I have no problem drafting Bajan in the first round. If you are out there, you have not started drafting your teams, you're thinking about who you want to select in the first round, the 8th overall pick, I think Bajan is a fine choice here. Just tonight, I think we're going to go with Eckler.
Yeah, I've been taking Bajan. I actually have 8% of him. I'm surprised it's that high. I didn't realize I've been clicking on him that much, but I'm actually pretty even with the first round guys. I'm over on all of them except for Eckler and probably Bijan, I guess, but like, over by a couple percent, 11, 12% of these guys. But I'm low on Stephon Diggs and AJ Brown. Stephon Diggs is the one I'm worried about. Last season, I was drafting him with the thought that he could be the overall wide receiver one. He had a tough season. I mean, one of the best offenses in football. He still has the potential to do that this year. But AJ Brown is the guy that I'm really having trouble getting there. Like, I can take Bijan or Austin Eckler, even Nick Chubb, and then usually one of the second round wide receivers is right there. I'm still comfortable taking him.
I have an okay amount of AJ. It's Devonta Smith with the Philadelphia Eagles that I'm very light on. I just took I think it's my first share of him this week in an offline, non-streamed draft. So I am looking at some of the top players here at multi positions, not just obviously the running backs, and trying to make sure get at least a few pieces of these guys because it's certainly the FOMO is real, Chuck. Any one of these guys could end up being the league winner this season. With Austin Eckler in the first round, there's a couple of different routes that I can go early here. Obviously, can stack his teammates, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Justin Herbert early here. Also, don't mind going with the other side of that, though, and going with Broncos wide receivers, maybe Javonte Williams, Russell Wilson in the 10th, 11th round for the week 17 game stack with the Chargers and the Broncos. So, obviously, tonight, Chuck, I think that's probably something I will try to do, one or the other of those two paths.
We'll talk about it more when we get to those picks, but those are some guys I'm definitely trying to add more of. Javonte and Kamara specifically. We've been taking James Conner all summer, but these guys seem like such good running back values compared to the wide receivers next to him. Like, typically, I'm drafting wide receivers in that spot, but lately, it's really hard not to get one of these guys. Even David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, like, this whole range seems like wasn't Josh Jacobs in this dead zone last year? I think there was one other dead zone running back that popped off, not Pollard, but there's a lot of value in that range, and so just thinking about that and getting Devonte Adams here, it still blows my mind that that's possible. Like, why
Yeah,
is Jalen Waddle going ahead of him?
I am low on Adams, admittedly, but in the
Mm.
middle of the second round here, that's a clear mistake. So, but maybe Chuck, that's how I will end up getting a little bit more of Adams exposure on my builds. Also have a semifinals week correlation. No, excuse me, first round of the playoffs correlation with Austin Eckler, Chargers Raiders in week 15. So another reason to emphasize one of the best NFL wide receivers of the last several years here in round two. Yes, I do think we expect the Raiders offense to be a little less efficient without Derek Carr under center, but I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo is as much of a drop off as people expect. I feel like this is a price that we should start buying now that Adams is firmly in the second round by ADP.
Oh yeah, I mean, it just like I'm kind of low on Adams too in the sense that I don't really want to take him over the other guys, but if he's there at 15, it feels like a screaming value. And so, one thing too, like what the 12 spot did here is kind of interesting. Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry, where I don't know, a month and a half ago, there was drafts where both of these guys could be had at the 2-3 turn rather than the 1-2 turn. And so, kind of what we were talking about, the running backs are going to start moving up, become more valuable as more casual drafters are coming in. And that seems to hold very true. Especially, I see the elite quarterbacks being pushed to the third round pretty frequently now.
Speaking of elite quarterbacks being pushed downward, I'll react to some recent news and I'll turn this into a two-part question for you. How do you feel about Joe Burrow now that we got the news yesterday that he has a little bit of a calf strain? Going to probably hold him out of practices, definitely preseason games throughout the rest of the summer here. Is that changing your approach, not just to Burrow, but some of his Bengal teammates? T. Higgins looks like he slid a little bit here tonight.
Yeah, I've seen. I've been doing a lot of drafts the last couple of nights, low buy-ins, and I've seen T. Higgins slide constantly. Jamar Chase has gone at pick four, pick three a few times. With Joe Burrow, I don't know. Like I have a bit of Joe Burrow. I'm not drafting him that much with my Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Like it looks like this guy's going to go for the double Bengals stack, but it's tough because there's such a strong correlation between the lower. I don't know exactly what it's called, but like lower leg
Mm-hmm.
lower extremity
Mm-hmm.
injuries, um, and the team's success throughout the season. And for Joe Burrow, I mean, it didn't seem too serious, but if he's going to be out a few weeks, I mean, I think that's just less reps he's going to get in training camp. Does he going to make an appearance in preseason? Maybe one drive or something in the last game. I don't think it should affect his value too much, though. Do you think it should affect his value?
I don't at this point, unless we get news that it's serious and it's not healing as much as they thought it would. Like, there's never a good time for an injury, right? But if there's
Mm-hmm.
going to be one, obviously you want it earlier rather than later. There's a real chance this has absolutely no impact on his 2023 fantasy production. So my mindset right now, Chuck, is if we get a little bit of a dip with Burrow and some of his Bengal teammates, we should be buying it because
Mm-hmm.
unless it gets super negative really quickly news wise, we don't have a tremendous reason to be concerned just yet, in my opinion. I will double down on the Chargers and take Keenan Allen here in round three. I have made my choice. Obviously, I think, well, not obviously. I tend to not want to go more than three players from the same team. And obviously, I am somewhat angling for Justin Herbert now if he does fall to me in the right spot. So I think, other than Herbert, I'm probably done with Charger players at this point.
So with Joe Burrow, like with his ADP, and kind of similar to Justin, like all these other guys, I don't just Joe Burrow's ADP is kind of tied to where T. Higgins and Chase are going, and they're
Mhm.
typically going in those first few draft slots. And so, like Joe Burrow could fall to like pick 52, I guess, but I don't really see his ADP falling a full round after that because it doesn't really make sense.
No, being tied to those wide receivers who are drafted in that range, someone's going to still grab him for the stack. I 100% agree with you there, but I'm happy to take the value if we get those guys a little cheaper. Maybe we get a little bit of a different roster construction with those first three picks, like we were talking about off the top of the
Mm-hmm.
show. Um, Couple of wide receivers with Austin Eckler in the first three rounds. I can tell you this is not a combination I've drafted yet. Maybe with the Adams ADP changing, this will be a little bit more common by the end of the contest. But Eckler, Adams, Keenan Allen feels pretty good to me. Obviously, I'm biased. So I'm pretty happy thus far with how things have gone to begin this draft, Chuck. And yeah, with Eckler as my, I'll call it hero RB or my only RB that I'm targeting early, I'm more than happy to continue to draft skill players at other positions as they fall to me. Best player available mostly. Got one eye on the correlations in the playoff weeks, just because training camps are starting. And I did talk about this a little bit with Brian on yesterday's stream. I imagine we're getting a few more viewers than have been watching throughout the spring and summer. The reason we talk so much about the playoff weeks is this tournament, Best Ball Mania 4, is heavily weighted payout wise to week 17. Obviously, the key to getting to week 17 is those correlations in the fantasy playoffs. So, in this particular contest that we're drafting, that's why we continue to talk about that an exhausting amount of time. I know that's a question we get sometimes. So, I just figured I would layer that in here. All right, Chuck, I am one player away, and no, it did not happen. I was hoping for
Yeah.
Jerry Judy here. Was running pretty hot with getting exactly who I wanted over the last few streams. Um, let's make a decision. Terry McLaurin, pretty much all draft season, Chuck. I've been happy to take the value with him. I have him inside my top 10 in fantasy projections for wide receiver this year. So getting him in the 40s is something I'm going to be happy with really anytime I can do it.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, Jerry Judy was the guy I figured you were shooting for, and that's the guy I'd take just 100% of the time if he was there. Terry's the other default option. But one thing I've been doing, so usually I would always do exactly what you did. But recently, I'm trying to just mix it up and get. I took Travis Etienne a couple times in a spot like this. Najee, I haven't really been on Najee, but I don't know. Maybe it's all the Twitter chatter about him getting me to click his name a little bit more.
He's going to be out there. We are going to have, obviously, he's a starter. He's going to be out there.
Yeah.
But we are going to see a little bit more to running back, I think. That was recently reported from training camp practices. Looks like both Najee and Jalen Warren, who I have more of than Najee this year
Mm-hmm.
so far, should get a lot of playing time in the same formations, which obviously does not suggest Najee will have the same like true like 20 to 25, 30 touch ceiling that he had early in his career with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But Najee's still a fine pick here in the fourth round. The volume should still be very good. I am thinking obviously a little bit about one of these other running backs if they fall to me in. This is now like the traditional dead zone for running back, but I still think there's some good picks here, Chuck. I don't mind. I'm back in on Kenneth Walker. Early when you and I were talking and he was going in the second round, I was like, this is too much after the pick they invested in Zach Charbonnet. But I think I need to get a little bit more Walker than I have. So I'm trying to, you mentioned forcing yourself to click on
Mm-hmm.
ETN a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Walker is the player I'm trying to force myself to click on a little bit in this range as well.
I've gotten to Walker a bit too. There's only a couple of guys I've been avoiding, but another thing I'm wondering is like if Joe Mixon and players like Alvin Kamara didn't have all that stuff going on at the beginning of the draft season, I feel like their ADPs would be higher.
It'd be second, third round picks. I think they'd be
Yeah.
up here with Ramondre and Brees
Mm-hmm.
Hall and Jacobs. So we're aligned there as well. All right. I do like that Aaron Jones correlation with Justin Jefferson in week 17 that Hayrod just grabbed here. Believe I talked about that a little bit in did put some pick strategy videos out in June on the channel. They're still pinned as a playlist on the Occupy Fantasy YouTube here. How to attack a draft here in Best Ball Mania 4 or any of the tournaments on Underdog Fantasy, depending on which pick slot you get. So, if you're just looking to dive into best ball this summer, now that camps have opened and you're, football season has started, so to speak, you're one of those and you're ready to kind of start allocating some of your entertainment dollars towards this. We've already done some of the hard work for you, laid out how to attack the draft board here in the first half of the drafts, depending on what pick you get. ADP has shifted a little bit since June, but not enough to the point where the general strategies we talk about have changed too much. So they're definitely worth checking out.
We have a question from Stephen B. How would we feel about Amon-Ra, Debo, Ridley, and Jamison Williams as our first four wide receivers? They all have a week 9 bye. The first thing I'll say about that is just, especially with having Jamison Williams, you're not going to get any production from him for 6 weeks. It doesn't affect the week 9 bye yet, but with your top 3 producers all having buys on the same week, like in a season long, it might sound like it's not that big of a deal, but when you're scoring so few points that week 9 compared to everyone else, it just you're just kind of putting yourself into a bit of a hole. And so it's something that I don't know if it happens to me in a few drafts, it happens. If I'm very strong at running back, or maybe I have an elite tight end or something to help make up for it a little bit, then I feel a little bit better about it. But I don't know. It's tough. I guess the combinations of players that I'm taking don't typically all have the same bye week. And so I'm not sure, Chris, what do you think about that with drafting a bunch of receivers with the same bye?
I don't care about it, honestly. It's a great question, but I am not actively thinking about the bye weeks as much as maybe one thinks I probably should be. I think at that point, I would probably definitely draw the line and be done drafting week 9 wide receiver bye weeks, because you want to make sure you still have high upside in that 1 week. But if you've got some good quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends that you expect to produce and hopefully get some spike weeks from some of your lower drafted wide receivers, specifically in week 9, I think that it's viable. And Chuck, that might be one way to start building out some combinations of players that are not going to be super high owned in the playoff rounds. If you're able to sneak through that group of, what was it, Amon-Ra, Calvin Ridley, and did you say Debo?
Yeah, Debo.
Yeah, that's a really high upside combination that not a lot of people, I think, are going to have for bye week related reasons. We got sniped on Justin Herbert, so we will not be getting the full Charger stack here, but that's all right. We have plenty of outs to end up with a roster that I think I'll feel pretty good about here, so I'm not tremendously concerned about it. Honestly, even without Justin Herbert, there's paths to having a ton of the production with the Chargers with just the 2 guys that I have. So Justin Herbert, maybe not super necessary to get the upside that I want here.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is just Austin Eckler runs in 2 touchdowns in week 17, 100 yards. Keenan Allen catches 10 balls for a touchdown, and Justin Herbert's not optimal, but those two guys are.
Yeah, you have that stack, but you have it with some other quarterback I have yet to draft, and maybe that quarterback outscores Justin Herbert in Week 17, and I have a slightly more unique build with more upside. That's obviously the outcome I'm rooting for now. So
Mm-hmm.
there is obviously some news that breaks every single day in training camp. Do you try to tune that out? Try not to overreact because it's pretty easy to overreact to every single headline you get now that we're getting real news, right? Obviously, we had Burrow today, a little bit of a story about Deontay Johnson with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Doesn't look like it deterred MMA Guru tonight. Deontay is fine, by the way, everybody. Looks like it
Mm-hmm.
was just some heat exhaustion that he was suffering from. But yeah, obviously, I'll let you speak to that while I make a selection here.
Yeah, I thought you were mentioning that because of Kyle Pitts. There was a video of Kyle Pitts running around, and people were like, he doesn't look like he's close to normal. So, how much can we weigh this in? Well, it's 6 weeks till the season starts. Kyle Pitts, I saw people, these are just armed Twitter doctors talking about, well, if he's ramping up and he's good to go by week 7, then he's still fine. And it's like, what does that even mean? If he's available to play, Kyle Pitts, I already think specifically he's already enough of value that I'm not really worried about it. With other guys, if it's like one player catching a ball, like one pass, like if it's a cool pass, that's awesome. But what does that mean for fantasy? Like, it's not going to happen all the time.
Cool passes
Um,
that they make catches on cool passes and shorts with no defender on them. Yeah, I mean they're great for the engagement and the social media metrics for the team employees and whatnot. But there's not much value beyond that. 100% correct.
Yeah, like I will say that there's certain videos that I will take into account more. Like the big one for me last year, and it sounds so stupid. I was thinking about this earlier. There's a video of Evan Engram literally just standing there catching the football, and he was going it in the late 170s last year. And I'm like, all right, well, Evan Engram can catch the football. That's been the biggest problem in his career is he can't catch the football. Maybe he'll be good, and he ended up doing that. So just I don't know. It's so stupid. Again, it's I got lucky on that one, but just pick and choose which information, which videos we're using to kind of, I don't know, to make our decisions, I guess.
The thing that I pay attention to in those videos, this is going to sound extremely like outrageous to the uninitiated, I guess. I look at like, okay, this wide receiver made a great catch. Who threw that football? And the reason I say that is because if we're looking at like a rookie wide receiver or like a secondary or a tertiary wide receiver, we want to know what unit they're working with in practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that sort of is a tell as to how the team values that player. Saw a great catch from Rashee Rice today on the Chiefs account, Chuck. And Rashee Rice deserves his flowers. I guess he's been playing very, very well with the first unit in practice. But I noticed the highlight they featured today was Rice working with Blaine Gabbert and not Patrick Mahomes.
Mm-hmm.
And while that might sound like really fringe information that doesn't have a tremendous amount of value at this point in time, it's one look, the guys that are going to start and play the most, they're not going to be getting those reps with Blaine Gabbert. They're going to be getting those reps with Pat, right? And you can say that
Mm-hmm.
for any team in the league. So definitely want to pay attention to little clues like that. If you're lucky enough and you live near one of the training camp sites for your favorite NFL team or just an NFL team near where you're living and you're able to check out some of the drills that they do in open practices to fans, pay attention to which players line up first for specific drills. They are lining up in a depth chart order. That is something that we are also looking at when we're getting ready to put out some of our preseason content that I know will be coming out next week that everybody's really excited about. So, yeah, look, we're deep into the sauce here, and these are the things we talk about. So,
I mean, that's definitely more actionable than me talking about Evan Engram standing in an open field catching pass. Like Amon Ra, they're talking about he caught 201 balls in a row the other day. Like, okay. We do have a follow up question from Stephen B. So he's got Chubb, Pierce, and Montgomery as his running backs, with Odell, Juju, and Gallup as the other receivers. I'm not super high on Odell, but if you think that Odell can contribute whatever his ADP value is around pick 100, then that seems fine. And you have Chubb and Pierce and Montgomery, who to me are three good running backs. So the week 9 bye thing, like Chris said, it's don't let it influence your choices too much. Especially the way I'm looking at this is you probably got Debo and Ridley. You got one of them a little bit late, I think, in the 4th round. So if you're getting the value on the guy, that might be enough to kind of make up for it. And then if you get to the playoffs anyway, it doesn't matter.
All right, so I'm on the clock here, Chuck. I'm just ruminating on my different options. I think I am okay with taking yet another running back and going with David Montgomery. Falling a little bit behind ADP at pick 77 to pick 80, pretty much right on ADP. But I do think the gap between him and Jahmyr Gibbs is. I'm really high on Jahmyr Gibbs, but I love taking shots on David Montgomery when he is still available for me.
Especially in half PPR, like we just want a touchdown from David Montgomery. He's not going to get the he's not going to have 100 attempts at the 1 yard line this year, but if he does half,
maybe he will. I mean, we saw Jamal Williams have that role on this team last year, and I do think while it is a little bit of that dumb kind of middle IQ kind of take, DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams last year, I think you can somewhat mentally plug in Gibbs into the Swift role, Montgomery into the Jamal Williams role. I think Gibbs will have a bigger role than what Swift had because the team is much higher on Gibbs than they were Swift based off of the transactions they pulled off this summer. But I think that's a fair framework to have in mind. And if David Montgomery is going to have the green zone work, all those carries inside the 5-yard line, he has a pretty good chance to rack up the touchdowns just like Jamal did last year.
That's all we want.
All right. So I got to think a little bit about what I want to do for a week 17 correlation here. And I'm thinking about what is still going to be here for me at pick 89. I have a player that I wanted to talk about tonight. And this is one of the things about doing these shows together, Chuck. Sometimes I'll draft a player just because I wanted to talk about them. So if this player falls to me, it's not necessarily someone that fits the build I have cooking right now, but I still think it's good conversation fodder. So check in about a minute for that. In the 8th and 9th round, I think this is where we're seeing the most movement in the draft board right now, just in general, other than at the bottom. I think using our ADP tracker, the biggest movers, Zamir White with the Las Vegas Raiders in line to probably get a chance to start if Josh Jacobs does not return. Richie James and Justin Ross with the Kansas City Chiefs. Richie, our cover boy tonight, rising on the news that we had surgery for Kadarius Toney, but another player that I think will start to climb based off of some really, really strong team reporting out of camp. It is running back James Cook of the Buffalo Bills, reportedly gearing up for a 3-down role, according to the coaching staff, but being heavily reported on now by Bills beats as well. This is not something I anticipated when I built my first run of projections, Chuck. I was figuring Devin Singletary leaves to go to the Houston Texans. The Buffalo Bills signed Damian Harris, previously of the Patriots. Maybe Harris gets a little bit of Singletary's share, and James Cook's workload stays relatively similar in 2023 to what it was in 2022. I think that was the wrong read. I'm flag planning now. I think James Cook is a really, really good pick here in this range.
I'm starting to come around on James Cook because of those reports. The thing that's deterring me is, has he never had 15 carries in a football game?
Oh my God! Like at any point in his life,
at any point in college or in the NFL. In high school, I imagine he did, but I might be mistaking it. But I feel like he never had the volume.
All right. I don't think that you're incorrect there. I can't say that I watched every single Georgia football game super closely, but he was not the primary tailback there used in passing situations, which is how the Bills initially used him. Quickly scanning James Cook's game logs with Georgia, I think we have a high of 12 rush attempts in a game in his senior season, or his final season, against Arkansas on October 2nd, 2021. And in the National Football League, James Cook in 2022,
it's not good.
14 carries is the most carries he has seen over the last 5 years of his football life. So good on you, Chuck. That was very, very sharp recall of information. Doesn't mean that he's not capable of getting that volume. This is a very
Right. Right.
volume heavy position. And the thing that I care about more so than the rush attempts, Chuck, is the targets. If we go
Mhm.
from 9 to 10 carries or 5 to 10 carries is more of a range, and like 2 to 3 targets per week, to that 15 to 20 to 4 to 6 targets per week on average, while that doesn't sound like a lot, I think that's huge for his upside in fantasy. And most importantly, for outperforming his ADP range of pick 89, 90. So that's what I'm tuned into right here.
One thing because I was thinking about this specifically earlier, how it relates to Devin Singletary. Like I mentioned the other day, Devin Singletary is going as like RB 49. If he finishes as RB 37, then he's a fine pick, got a ADP value, and Devin Singletary finished as a RB 24 last year in half PPR, and right now James Cook is going as the RB 31. And so if James Cook just does literally exactly what Devin Singletary did last year, then he's probably a value at this pick, and it's really not asking for much.
And his older brother goes here at pick 102, kind of free falling a little bit. I don't know if this Jet stuff is real with Dalvin Cook. I'll wait to see if he actually signs somewhere before I get super excited, Chuck. That's just kind of my mindset here. I'm happy to have Cortland
Yep.
Sutton fall to me here. I had kind of mentally moved a little bit off of Denver and the Chargers for Week 17, but if they're going to give it to me, I'm going to take it. So
Yeah, Cortland Sutton's another guy I've gotten more comfortable clicking on just because the lack of options around that range for receivers. I don't want to take Juju as much as I can help it.
yeah, I'm trying to be done drafting Juju unless he's a screaming value. Juju's
Mhm.
there for me in round 11. That's kind of where I'm doing it. Boyd, obviously, usually my auto pick here, trying to make sure I keep my exposure to him in check as well. So if I get Cortland Sutton, 7 or so picks behind ADP, that is a very good reason to be off of him, Boyd here, excuse me. All right, what do I want to do here at pick 113? So now that I'm probably angling for Denver, as I say, slander Juju Smith-Schuster, I've got a little bit of an incentive to take a Patriot if I want to
Mhm.
get Russell Wilson here at some point in the next couple of picks, because that is who the Denver Broncos play in fantasy semifinals week 16. We have plenty of other players we can use other than Juju to get that, though. So I think we're okay here.
Mhm. I agree.
I still can't believe we were able to get Nico Collins. Talked about this in the last stream with Brian a little bit. 40 picks later than this. I'm still fine selecting him here, by the way. I think he's still a value, but it is kind of wild how much the board has moved for some of these players in this range.
That's one thing that I'm really struggling with is the guys that I got great value early on. It's really hard for me to click on them at their new ADPs. Nico Collins is the prime example. Deontay Johnson's another one. A few of the guys that we were early on just they're still good picks at their ADP, but I'm like, oh, I got him there. How can this lineup compete with the previous lineup I made? And so something I think I need to think about a little bit more.
Are you so? I mean, that's probably has implications in the playoff rounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously you're only competing against your pool mates in the first 14 weeks here. But so you
Yeah.
think in the playoff rounds, some of these screaming values early I guess how am I trying to ask this question? Do you think that the players that were drafted much earlier or much later in drafts, they'll be on better rosters in the playoffs than the rosters they're on now? Is that kind of what you're saying here?
Something like that. Like I look at a few of my early drafts and like these teams are just not possible to be drafted today. Just the combination of players like I'd have to pull up an example to really illustrate it, but just kind of like I have teams where I have two players in front of Nico Collins, and then I'm getting Nico Collins. Where now, I don't know. It maybe I'll try to pull up one of my old teams on the next stream and see if I can illustrate it better. But like I said, it doesn't really make sense. Like if I thought they were great values before, then they're appropriately valued now. Then I should still be wanting to click on them.
No particular reason other than I just really like Romeo Dobbs this season for him in round 10, by the way. No
Yeah.
direct correlations on this roster, but just in case any of our thousands of viewers are wondering, that's why I took Romeo Dobbs here. So, um, Dulcich, I'm having a hard time justifying at the cost. Like the player a lot, but now that we're sort of angling for more Denver exposure, this gives us a nice little segue to talk about the outrageously hilarious comments from Sean Payton about the 2022 Denver Broncos. I'm sure you saw those, Chuck.
Yeah,
Look, Sean Payton pulls no punches, and he's obviously the interesting thing there with some of that is he's directly attacking some of the people that he still works with that are above him and
it's
saying that they basically
awesome.
put out an extremely horrible effort last year. So we'll see if that kind of has a negative effect later on in the season. I will tell you that I think Sean Payton has been a coach that has always had his thumb on the pulse of his locker room. And this is probably a locker room that felt really dejected last year, the way things turned out. He's obviously trying to galvanize a little bit of emotional support right now. And that's, I think, the only value you can take out of that right now. He's trying to win over his players.
I saw two sides to that. One is just Sean Payton like realizes how much of a dumpster fire he inherited, so he's kind of just setting up the fan base to temper their expectations. And then on the other, didn't he walk it back this morning a little bit? Like, oh, I didn't realize I had my coaching hat on. I had my Fox hat on, making those comments. Like, I think he kind of walked it back a little bit, like just feeling bad about what he said.
Yeah, he probably realized he was a little meaner than he needed to be. But look, I think
And
he was speaking from the heart. I don't think he, as much walking back as he wants to do. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said. So
John Cotter, week 5, Peyton is going to eat those words. Well, who does who does Denver
I'm
play in week
assuming
five?
that's when they play the Jets because Hackett and
Yep.
is obviously with Rodgers again in the Jets. So yeah, that's definitely going to be a very, very, very interesting football game at this point in time. 100%. Not going to want to miss that one.
Yep.
Knowing the track record with the Broncos over the last year or so, it's probably a primetime game. So we are going to not get cute with it, not let ourselves get sniped, and we are going to take Mr. Unlimited Russell Wilson here in round 11.
It's actually not a primetime game, but it's a 1 p.m. game, so not quite primetime though. It's kind of
No,
surprising.
for Jets fans, that has been their prime time for a long time, so they're used to it. Sorry, I can't.
Brutal.
I
Brutal.
can't let old habits die hard here. The Jets are going to be a significantly improved team this season, and I'm looking forward to them having the ability to make some noise in the AFC for sure.
We were talking about Dalvin Cook a little bit. Are you going to be more interested, assuming Dalvin Cook signs with the Jets this weekend and Brees Hall falls a little bit? Are you going to be a little bit more interested in Brees Hall in the 4th round, or is he more, or are you going to be less interested since Dalvin Cook's there?
Well, I'll put it this way: I'm already trying to get more Brees Hall because I feel like
Same.
I don't have enough.
Yeah.
So if we get value on him, I'm gonna just continue to do that and try to get him at value. The thing that will be a struggle, and it's a struggle we have every single year when this happens, Chuck, is when you get one of these falling knives with a player's ADP going down. It's kind of like, how do you really judge what the true ADP is?
Mm-hmm.
Like Kadarius Toney, where did he go tonight?
I meant to ask about that earlier. I went
trying
kind
to
of
find
early.
him on the board.
Is that 77, 97? Can't read.
Yeah, 77 in this one. So that's right around where his ADP has been. I've seen him go after pick 100 a couple of times. I know you said you've been drafting quite a bit. I
Yeah.
don't know what your experience has been, but
He goes
that's
after
one of those
100
things
every
where,
time.
because I'd have to double check with our rep what their ADP formula is. I don't think it's like every single draft. I do think it's weighted towards the last X number of drafts. But
Mm-hmm.
as that kind of happens, you're going to see these ADPs drop kind of gradually and not necessarily reflect the true ADP within the last 100 drafts or something like that, right? So just something to be aware of as we move along here. Something else to be aware of is when you're on the clock and you need to make a selection. I
I like it.
don't have as much of this player. I'm buying into the hype. It's a little, well, actually, it's right on where his ADP currently is. Rashee Rice, 2nd-round draft pick with the Kansas City Chiefs. I've got quite a bit of MVS, quite a bit of Kadarius. I've started to draft a lot more Sky Moore. Rashee Rice, the one guy up here at the top for the Chiefs, I don't really have enough of just yet. So I'm happy to get a little bit here.
I was actually kind of disappointed to see how much Tony I have. I had 9%. I thought I had less. But I have 10% Sky Moore, 9% Rashi Rice, 7% MVS, and 5% Richie James, which I wish I had a little bit more, but I feel like I'm pretty even there.
You probably got 5% more than most of the field because he was free for basically 2 months here. So I wouldn't feel too badly about that. This is a very interesting range at wide receiver. Really, all of these last 5 guys that have gone, I think Gallup may be at risk a little bit. We're starting to see some hype for a second year wide receiver Jalen Tolbert out of Cowboys camp. With Arizona, some hype for rookie Michael Wilson. For the
Mm.
Rams, I think Van Jefferson's a little overrated. I think this is a bad ADP for this player. That's just my own personal opinion. I'd rather have Cup and Higbee than Van Jefferson. That's just in this range, especially Jefferson going right near Higbee. I'd just rather have Higbee. KJ Osborne, a little bit of competition from Jalen Naylor, I think, is the wide receiver that has been making a little bit of noise in camp as well. This is where wide receiver starts to get a little weird on the board, Chuck.
I've actually found myself really liking a lot. Like, I guess I talk myself into a lot of these late guys, like KJ Osborne, who he's probably the wide receiver 3. Like, I know you mentioned Naylor, but KJ Osborne did pretty well last season, and I don't know, is it a guarantee that Addison's number 2? He's probably the better athlete. And then kind of similar with the Chargers, Joshua Palmer versus Quentin Johnston. Like, I'm taking Johnston at his ADP with the assumption that Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are not going to start every single game this year. If Quentin Johnson ends up being the number 2 for half of the games, which is probably optimistic for him, then it's going to be a smash pick. But Joshua Palmer is still free at the end of drafts, and he did really well in that exact role last season. So I guess
And
there's
you're
just
looking at it's like not an equally weighted decision. You've got Quentin Johnson at pick 80 or Joshua Palmer at pick 216.
yeah.
Like it's just the odds that QJ is just a lock to be fully ahead of Palmer there. I mean, I would rather own more QJ than Palmer
Mhm.
overall, but yeah, you take that shot that Palmer outproduces his ADP, and it's really that's what you're drafting against, the ADP, not
Mhm.
necessarily Quentin Johnson directly, because you unfortunately you can get scenarios where maybe both of those starting wide receivers miss some time, and now both
Mhm.
QJ and Joshua Palmer are playing larger roles than expected. So I don't think it's going to change the Chargers' play calling at all. I
Mhm.
certainly don't want to see that happen based off of the players who selected at the top of the board here, but it's obviously something that is definitely possible throughout an NFL season.
Oh yeah. There's a few guys like that though. With Richie James too, is he still on the board? I've seen him go as high as pick like 99, and then usually I see him going in the 140s recently. So he's a guy I feel like is going to just jump up. I know his ADP came up a little bit, but
So our best receiver on the board is DJ Chark here. I cannot stop drafting Tyler Algier. I
Mhm.
think Arthur Smith and the Falcons are still going to approach football games relatively similar to how they approached them in 2022. Feel like they started to have a little bit more success late in the season with it. I don't think they're going to deviate too much from being very run heavy. There's a player kind of similar to the one who went directly after him that we've talked about a few times in the last few weeks, Chuck. I just think he's gonna play every single week. He's gonna score some points for us. And as my RB4, like I'm happy to have that with the upside of him being a top 10 to 15 running back if anything happens to Bijan. So more than
I'm
okay with Algier here.
I mean, Algier was at worst a league average starting running back last year. He was probably better than league average. Where Devin Singletary, like we talked about, he was below league average. And just speaking of like the athletes, like Tyler Algier probably blows Devin Singletary out of the water. Sorry, Devin Singletary, but it's just that standalone value with the handcuff value is just so good for this late. And it's like I mentioned, I'm trying to get early running back because I really don't want to have to depend on a ton of these guys late to produce points. But like one of them is going to do it at some point this season, at least one.
I guess let's be a little more explicit for the people. Are we talking early? We want more exposure to those guys going in the first 5 rounds, right? That's really
Yeah,
what we mean
yeah,
by early. Because for me,
yeah.
in the first like 8 rounds, if I get 2 or 3 running backs in the first 96 picks, I'm usually feeling pretty good. That
Hmm.
line would be drawn here at James Cook, who I selected, Rashad
Hmm.
White, Javante Williams, Alvin Kamara. I do think that's a pretty decent tier break to what's available below them. If you got 2 or 3 of those guys, you're probably doing all right.
That's how
Anybody above
I usually feel best if I have two early-ish running backs, and then my third running back is someone in the like Kamara James Cook range. I have Damian Harris really high on my list. He's probably going to be my highest exposed running back when it's all said and done, and it's just banking on the goal line touches. And I think his ADP is too low. But I was also Damian Harris over Ramondre Stevenson last season, so that didn't go well. And they had the
I
same
am.
ADP last year.
I'm going against you tonight, so I will.
Yep.
I'll keep my thoughts to myself and be polite. But no, I don't think Damien Harris is a bad pick at cost either, though. I think that's a fine thing to be interested in here. I'm gonna go with Tim Patrick over Marvin Mims. I still think, even though his ADP, Patrick's ADP, has risen 20-ish picks over the last few weeks based off of some hype, I still think this is a very good value for him, and it gets me my double stack now with Russell Wilson.
So like I was talking about earlier, there's like weird things that will put me on or off a certain player. And Tim Patrick, someone mentioned he was 29 and he hasn't really done much in the NFL yet, and that kind of was enough to just, all right, well, what are we really expecting? I know he hasn't been perfectly healthy ever, but
When healthy and available alongside Judy and
mhm,
Sutton, Patrick has out targeted those players.
love that.
We have a new coaching staff, so obviously that could mean absolutely nothing now. But
Mm.
that is something that keeps me interested in Tim Patrick. The Broncos themselves are super happy to have this guy back in the fold this season. I will continue to get a healthy amount of Tim Patrick. If I have 30% of Tim Patrick, like some of the other players I have that I showed at the top of the stream, I think that'll be too much. But in rosters where I'm trying to correlate specifically with Tim Patrick, I'm more than okay with getting him here on the 14th round, 15th
And
round. Like,
and
that's
that's
fine.
and that stat is the type of thing to get me back on a player.
So you just react to the last thing you heard, like way too much. That's what you do. No, I'm just
Absolutely, yeah. No, absolutely. Like my takes have changed all summer. I've said 7 different guys are going to be my highest owned running back or receiver, and like a couple of them held true. Devin Singletary slept there, KJ Osborne slept there, but yeah, takes just change. Like we get more information.
Mm-hmm. And as it's not even meant like as like an insult. Like we should
Oh,
be
I know.
flexible to
Yeah,
always change our opinion based off of the information we get because we're going to get better information as we get closer to the season. So we should be doing that. Zamir White going so aggressively in the last couple of weeks. Now that we have some pretty good information that Josh Jacobs not super interested in reporting to camp without that long term deal he's seeking. Granted, it's like a free draft pick here at the end, so it's not like the risk is super high, but we're at a point now where at some point the decision is, do the Raiders just go with Zamir White or do they offer some of this money that they had allocated to Josh Jacobs franchise tag to Dalvin Cook or
right.
Leonard Fournette or Kareem Hunt, right? Like that would be my fear here now with shoving all in on Zamir White. I'll take him a little bit, but I don't think this is the player that we want to like push all of our chips in just yet.
I think it's great if you got him in the last rounds for free, and now you see him shooting up the boards. Feel like you got a little value. Like we were ahead of the field, but I mean, Zamir White had 10 carries last season, and
Mm-hmm.
like he could come out and be good, sure. But like you said, sign Ezekiel Elliott or Leonard Fournette. They were pretty good last year.
Mm-hmm.
Have not saying just to be the workhorse, but have them be a committee with Zamir White. That just makes too much sense. So they'll never do it.
Got to think a little bit about my backup quarterback situation because I don't want to be left with Sam Darnold, for example. I'm not going to be going that direction here. Brock Purdy, only San Francisco 49er quarterback I'm personally interested in, did go with George Kittle tonight, but that was more for correlation with Terry, who's already on my roster. A little bit of skinny correlation in week 17 there, Chuck. I'm happy to get Jordan Love as my second quarterback pretty much any time that he's available after ADP like he is here tonight. So that is what we're going to do here in the 15th round. I think we're in.
Jordan Love is a guy I was never clicking on early, but now people on Twitter have convinced me enough that he could just be Patrick Mahomes. So I'll take some shots.
Any of these guys, look, hey, CJ Stroud could be Patrick Mahomes too. I have a lot of Stroud as my second quarterback as well. Didn't make sense for the team I'm building here tonight, but
Yeah.
I love a lot of the quarterbacks that you can get late here, which is why I'm okay with reaching, I think, a little bit more for elite quarterbacks in the first 4 or 5 rounds, because I think those constructions sort of lend you towards, okay, I'm going to be considering someone late that pairs with one of my wide receivers. Another one that I could have waited for here, admittedly, would have been Jimmy Garoppolo with Devontae Adams, since I took him in the second round. But I do think Jordan Love has a little bit more upside than Jimmy Garoppolo. I think Love a little bit more mobile, should do a little bit more on the ground, And we love those types of quarterbacks when we can get some rushing production alongside their passing production.
Another guy down here, are you getting to much Sam Howell? Because he ends up being the second quarterback on a lot of my elite QB teams, drafting a lot of Terry McLaurin, some Curtis Samuel, so I get it. But is he a guy that you view any differently than we did earlier?
Because I'm pretty high on Terry, I think he makes sense for me. In fact, probably would have been who I considered here over Love, just because I think Howell, Scary Terry, probably a little bit of a better duo than Love, Romeo Dobbs. But I think there's a little more risk with Howell that he's not a lock to start all season
Okay.
long, where it feels like Jordan Love is probably outside of injury locked in as Green Bay's QB1 this season. So
Okay.
that would be one thing to think about when you're drafting your quarterbacks. We're okay with taking like a Kyler Murray here in round 14, like Hayrod did. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if he stacked him or just took him alone. It looks like he just kind of has Kyler Murray here, but we're much more concerned in this format where again the payout is weighted towards the end of the
Mm-hmm.
season. We want these quarterbacks to still be playing at the end of the season, so we can't control for injury. But if we know some of these guys are in precarious positions, they're the ones that I would like to avoid if I can on my teams. I think Jimmy Garoppolo kind of fits that bill just a little bit with the Raiders. I don't know if they're fully committed to Garoppolo at this point.
Well, with what you're talking about during the playoff weeks, another thing I'm really trying to consider is just what are the chances that these guys can put up, I don't know, at least 25 plus in every playoff week? Can my quarterback room put up 25 plus in every week? You know, is Russell Wilson and Jordan Love enough to get us through the playoffs? Are you considering adding a third quarterback here?
I think if Jimmy is still sitting there in the last round, I may do it. I'm thinking about getting we got a 2-4-8-1. I definitely need at least one more tight end. I've got Russell Wilson and Jordan Love, Eckler, Montgomery, Cook, Algier. I could let this go with these four, depending on what falls to me. Having an elite tight end in Kittle, I think
Mm-hmm.
I probably would be okay with going just one more at that position. In fact, I think we're on the clock. And what I will take here to go with my James Cook selection at running back, some week 17 correlation, Mike Gesicki as my second tight end. A little bit of a stock down I saw from Mike Reese, I believe it is, reports on the Patriots for ESPN on Gesicki. I'll have to read more as to exactly why, but I still think this guy's going to be out there and have a really good chance to catch passes for the
Mm-hmm.
Patriots this year. So happy to get him at the end of a draft board check. No problem selecting him for me in round 16. Um, Paris Campbell, Hunter Renfro, like there are, even though wide receivers do go very, very fast and furious here on Underdog, there are still guys that can
Yep.
produce here at the end of the board. So these are obviously two of them I'm most excited about. Devontae Parker even feels like he may have a little bit more spike week potential than round 16 ADP suggests. So if you're selecting one of these guys as your final wide receiver, you should feel pretty good about it, in my opinion.
I've
Deneric
had,
Prince off the board. Wow. Okay. That's a camp star we probably need to talk a little bit more about throughout some future shows. We're going to start seeing more of these players that get training camp buzz go at the end of drafts, Chuck, and Deneric Prince, certainly one of them.
who is this guy?
Yes. So Deneric Prince and Richie James goes right after him, our cover boy tonight. I was kind of hoping Richie might make it back to me. Deneric Prince flashing a little bit of ability, special teams in the passing game in camp with the Kansas City Chiefs. They talked about him. I say they. Beat writers talked about him flashing in rookie camp, in OTAs. Well, now he's doing it in training camp as well. I think the only thing to be leery of there is cliche, but crowded running back room, a lot of talented players competing for reps there. I don't know who Deneric Prince is going to push off the roster to actually be active on game day when they have the ability and the luxury of being able to practice squad this kid, for a few weeks being a rookie, right? So that would be my concern as far as best ball contests are concerned. But Chiefs Kingdom is excited about this young player.
To me, the first thing I see is that he's undrafted, and I don't know, like if we get some crazy reports out of camp, like really confirmed information, then sure, I'll start adding him. But at this point, just how many undrafted guys have ever produced fantasy points besides James Robinson? I'm sure there's a few, but that's the only one I can think of.
All right. So I think I will probably go with Gray here is a running back that they think may have a chance to be Saquon's backup. That's why you're probably going to start to see him go late here. I mean, I'll just say it because we ran pretty hot with it working out last stream. If Zamir White is still on the board at 200, that will be my pick here. But there's still plenty of other running backs available where I think I will take at least one more here, Chuck. And I 8 wide receivers. I just in my head I have that as a number where like I feel like that's pretty good. I feel like that's enough
Yeah.
usually,
Yeah.
and especially considering the ones that I have on this roster here, I don't think I need to go beyond Tim Patrick, for example. So quarterback starting to fly. We will take a relatively low risk flyer on Zamir White. And maybe if things work out, I have the RB1 and the wide receiver one on a Raiders offense here where I don't necessarily need to get the quarterback to have
Hmm.
some really high upside
Hmm.
in week 17 with that stack. So
I like it. There's a couple late guys I'm starting to add. Gus Edwards is one that I was
mhm.
drafting here and there, but with the uncertainty with J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards could end up being a pretty decent value. And Zamir White, of course. I don't think I'm getting to CEH as much, but he's still there. And Kieran Williams on the Rams is another guy that is largely going undrafted who got hurt on like his first play of the season last year. That could, if Cam Akers goes down, Kieran Williams is probably the guy there. But that's a shot.
I think my favorite quarterback late here, especially when I have incentive to add him to my roster, like with Drake London or Kyle Pitts or even Bajan. But Desmond Ritter feels like a really, really good pick here late if you still need a quarterback. Feels like Atlanta is committed to him for at least the 2023 season. So, and a little bit of rushing upside there as well with Ritter. So those are always plays that can produce in fantasy football. I'm a little shocked Chuba Hubbard goes as late as he does, just given the fact that we have seen Miles Sanders not necessarily succeed too much in the passing game. I know different franchise, different coaching staff, but also have some injuries that tend to nag throughout
Mm-hmm.
the season. I know those aren't necessarily super predictable, but we know how the average fantasy player thinks, and they do think about that stuff. I would think for those reasons, Chuba Hubbard would go higher than the last round of drafts on average. And I
Yeah, shoot.
still can't believe, like, I don't know, is it Robbie Anderson? Is it Robbie Chosen? I have seen like Chosen Anderson. I have seen this name like 3 or 4 different ways across sites right now. Either way, Chuck talked about this with Brian on the last show. Taking some flyers on a third Miami pass catcher late, I think that's another really sharp move here.
It's so funny with him specifically. I was going through my teams last year to try to do some research for weekly winners, just to see what I personally had, and I see Chosen Anderson at the end. I'm like, I didn't draft this dude. Why is he on half my teams? I've taken Braxton Berrios. I don't think I've taken Chosen Anderson this season though.
I know that the Packers banged tight end a couple of times in the NFL draft this season, but I'm happy to get Luke Musgrave for a little bit of double correlation with Jordan Love, my second quarterback, to close out this draft. It's really the only reason I was looking at the third tight end here.
That's the best way I think to draft the last tight end. If they correlate with a quarterback, that's the best. Another late guy, Jake Ferguson's been making some noise, I think, in training camp. I've been drafting him a bit, just assuming he's a starter. It sounds like he's going to be. So it could be another like kind of Luke Musgrave type in the last round.
Well, we had a great time talking about all the news we're starting to get in training camps this evening, Chuck. We are going to have at least one more stream this weekend. Not sure when that's going to be. We'll make sure we announce that in the Discord when that information becomes available. Maybe we'll get another NBA stream going soon. I know you've been kind of working on that as well here on Underdog, Chuck. So, really looking forward to what we're putting out here throughout the rest of the summer as things heat up. We have obviously preseason football that will be starting in a week. That'll be very exciting as well. Obviously, wrapping up to end the stream here. Is there anything you want to mention before we get out of here?
No, good team, good discussion. Pretty good stream today. Happy for we got 7 live viewers right now. Appreciate you guys for watching the whole show. It's awesome. Please let us know what you think. Join us in the Discord. Ask questions. Yeah, and all that.
Promo code Occupy. If you haven't signed up for Underdog just yet, you can get a 100% deposit match on your first $100 deposit. It'll give you up to $200 to start entering some of these contests like Best Ball Mania 4. We still have the Slow Puppy here, a $5 contest with a really, really strong payout structure. 75K to first place, and a regular season, I believe there's a regular season prize pool in here as well, Chuck. Correct me if I'm wrong. So lots of different ways to start playing fantasy football here on Underdog with Best Ball. Thank you all for watching. Appreciate you as always. We will talk to you all very, very soon.